what is often lost in this crime wave that we're experiencing all across the United States, as much as we try to dissect and give love and understanding to the perpetrator, we forget that there's a victim. Why should anyone who gets up in the morning, go about their daily life, taking care of their family, contributing to our society, upholding their community values, or merely goes about their daily life, and then they face this traumatic experience of falling prey to crime? It's just so unjust for law-abiding citizens to live in fear, feeling insecure, reluctant to step outside their homes, looking over their shoulders, while these perpetrators who have no conscience brazenly continue their killing spree, their robbing spree, their car theft spree. And you know what? They're even emboldened by this lax criminal penalty season we find ourselves in, and it encourages them to not only seek their next target, but find them and take them out. Where's the balance of fairness? Is this justice? While it may not be appropriate in some people's mind to treat children exactly as adults, yes, we understand they're not as mature, but there needs to be some level of harshness in our responses to them. My parents were harsh to us when we stepped out of line. There were consequences for bad behavior and disrespect. Because you know what? Their ultimate goal was to make sure they had good children who brought about good in society, to continue on the legacy of this place we call America. All kids can't be rehabilitated. And sometimes we have to assure that they serve a sentence or some kind of time in jail or somewhere, because then they can aspire afterwards to lead these productive and law-abiding lives. While I may not possess, and many of us don't, a definitive solution, I think it has become quite evident that the current policymakers are not enacting laws and policies that brings us closer to our goal of safety and secure. It is without any question to many common sense people that refusing to hold children and adults accountable for their crimes achieves the exact opposite of their goal, and is exactly what we're seeing now. And no person should ever have to become the victim of a crime. We live in the most technological and most advanced, most prosperous nation that has ever existed on the planet. With all these opportunities, everyone should have the potential to seize upon the opportunities. If they get a good education, they find the opportunities by having real self-esteem, real self-worth. But by refusing to hold children accountable for their actions, you know what we're doing? We're denying them the chance to become law-abiding citizens and seize these opportunities that exist. Ordinary citizens, the very people who bear the brunt of these actions, deserve better. Children deserve better. Whether our policymakers genuinely desire this for them remains an open question. Let me welcome my guest tonight as we talk about this juvenile crime. Hans A. von Spakovsky is a manager for Election Law Reform Initiative. Marcia Dyson is the founder of the Women's Global Initiative, former educator. Leonard is a crime media relations expert. And Dominick Izzo served 16 years as a police veteran. You know, what is it that lawmakers, what is it they need to do, Dominick, to change this trajectory and to change it fast before more innocent people just die for no reason at all to the hands of these callous, cold-blooded criminals?
They need to give authority back to the parents to be parents. The second state stepped in where they wound up having like DCFS, Child Family Services, to where if you saw somebody disciplining a kid in the restaurant, you called the police and the police came over and they struck up an investigation. All of a sudden the parent was under the microscope. That's where all this went to south. This is a parenting job. Physical discipline within reason doesn't need to return back into the home. You cannot reason with a 5-year-old who's out of control with that timeout generation. I was born in the 70s. My parents were a little heavy-handed, but it was discipline, it was structure, it was faith, it was family. The state made sure they destroyed all that. So I don't know if you give that back to the parents, I don't know if they're capable of taking it over again, but that's where it needs to start.
Marcia?
Well, first of all, it's not only a family issue, because I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and so I really know what a heavy hand is. It's also a community situation as well. The fracturing of the community, the fracturing of the family, but it's also educational. The fact that $588 per day to keep a child in detention center rather than giving that toward education is a problem. That comes out to $218,000 a year. Would our government and our policymakers legislate that much money per child to educate them? $218,000, Armstrong, is a lot of money to benefit the children through educational and social centers. And we also need ways into which we counteract the culture into which they live, which is way different than when we grew up, because the parents are not the influencer only. It is also the society in which they live, whether it's the groups that they hang with, and definitely social media.
Leonard, these kids are different, though. They don't fear law enforcement. I watch videos where these kids walk into a grocery store and a law enforcement officer's at the counter taking care of his business for his family, and they go to reach to grab his gun because they need a gun for whatever they need it for. And this guy's wearing a badge, and I'm watching it. They disrespect law enforcement. They don't respect the authority. They have no fear of being shot. Is it that they have no fear of being shot? Or is it they're just high and don't realize what they're doing at the time? How much are these drugs impacting this behavior? I mean, it's just brazen.
Well, it's drugs, it's mental health. Look, 90% of the offenders that I've talked to within the correctional system, they come from horrific backgrounds. They come from backgrounds where they were abused, both sexually, violently. Many have brain damage. Many have just ills from being mistreated as children. Our parents today do not know how to raise children. One of the biggest decreases that we've ever had in crime per research is when nurses and social workers went in and taught parents how to be parents. So we have a huge problem with the fact that our kids are being abused. They're being abused by their parents, they're being abused by their families, and they're being abused by their communities. When you come up with no social structure whatsoever, when you come up with no love, when you don't read to your child, when you don't hug your child, well, what do we expect when they grow up that way? And again, the overwhelming majority of the offenders that I've talked to, this is what they describe as their upbringing. You talk to female offenders, and the majority will tell you that they were sexually abused as children. So we have a huge problem in terms of just raising our kids and being sure that parents know how to raise our children. That is 90% of the problem that we are currently experiencing.
Hans, if you go back 20 and 25 years ago, these kids had the same complaints. You had the same issues. You look at the media. You look at what Ronald Reagan was fighting. You look at what's going on in the 60s and the 70s. These issues are not new, but these kids are different. The way they have no fear of the consequences is something we have not seen in recent memory.
Well, that's in fact the biggest problem is they don't see any consequences from their misbehavior. And part of the reason for that is, as you know, in the last few years, there's been this movement of these progressive, I actually call them rogue prosecutors, who've been elected in cities across the country, Boston, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia. They don't believe in prosecuting crimes. The rogue prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, who came into Manhattan, said, misdemeanor crimes, well, we're not going to prosecute them. And about half of the felonies that are committed in the city, he also said, we're not going to prosecute them. And what's the result been? Huge increases in crimes in those cities. And the thing for people to remember is the crime issue is hyper-localized. You could live in a safe state, but if you live in one of these cities with these rogue prosecutors, you're going to be in the middle of a crime wave coming up.
You know, Dominick, you're listening to this conversation, and And I know, as someone who's dealt with this firsthand, you have a very unique perspective on this. But I can't help but think about how the two kids, one in the car driving and the other shooting the video, and this 60-year-old law enforcement was on the bike, and the other kid with the video say, run him over, using expletives, say, run him over. Ran him over, laughed at him, joked about it, partied about it, and then they were arrested. I mean, to just know that you've killed a law enforcement officer, to know what happens when you violate the code blue. I mean, it was just to watching that, to see how do you get to the point where you just think that you can just kill a police officer. If you get to that point with that mindset, what will you do to anybody else?
Everyone, including you, all of your guests laid out the perfect petri dish for what we have with today's kids. You talked about drugs. Your other guest talked about education system. And there's no love in the household, and there's no accountability in the courts. We saw that all the time. The felony approval system we used to call it felony denial, because we knew we would never get anybody that we arrested prosecuted. So if you take that, and then you take a generation that is always on their phone being desensitized. You know, the argument over the years about the video games, right? That's, you have people saying video games don't cause the problems. With this nonstop strobe and flash and imagery that just keeps going past into your brain, everything that all of your guests said completely contribute to almost like a drone behaviored kid who has no sense of right or wrong. The drugs 100% do desensitize their ability to rational, and you're almost creating sociopaths out there. So everything that all of your guests said, they all come together and they culminate, and you're making a breed of kids out there that has no morals. They have no morals, and it's going to keep going.
Are they animals?
No, because animals have a purpose of hierarchy. They're not animals. Their behavior isn't even animalistic, because the animal kingdom, they have purpose, even if it's jockeying for the position of who's leading the pack. So no, that's not fair to animals.
Marcia, I felt something from you when I referred to them as whether they're animals or not. They behave like the animal kingdom.
No.
The animal kingdom doesn't kill that way.
No, they're not animals. What I think their behavior might seem animalistic, but these are children. And as the other guests said, that when you look at the petri dish of everything that we have said that sort of culminates into who they are now, it's even worse for them, because during COVID, I'm at the Richard Wright Charter School, and we have Zoom classes, and I would talk to the students. They seem to be doing well, but then when you were one-on-one, they were isolated in their homes. Their parents may have had mental problems. There was sexual abuse in some of the homes. So this kind of deteriorates the moral fabric right in the womb, which is called the home in our community. That's why I said we need community engagement. Certain things we'll never be able to legislate.
You know what? We have all this.
No.
We have it.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we really do.
Kids.
But there's other factors too that we could talk about later. Let me tell you, in the public schools.
I tell you what, let me take a little break.
Take a break.
I'm sorry. We have all this. These kids are not slowing down their killing.
No, I'm not saying they're slowing down, but let's talk about why.
We have all the help. We spend all the money. We put them through all the kind of psychosis that they need to go through. And guess what? They're getting worse. We'll be back.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, we will.
We will.
Yes. I think what is often overlooked in crime is that the lingering impact it has on families for such a long time. Sometimes when brothers go to jail, the little sister has no one else at home to care for them. Sometimes they're put in foster care. When the father's placed in jail, sometimes they're just left all alone. And we don't talk enough about the lingering impact of crime. And we want to discuss that with you today.
Sure.
Yes, Attorney Barron.
We don't talk enough about it. All day, almost every day, out of our office comes a press release. And 9 times out of 10, it's about an indictment, a sentencing, something bad has happened, and someone is being held appropriately accountable. And that message is important, and that sends a message of deterrence to the individuals involved, and also hopefully a general deterrence to those out there, and sends the message, hey, if you do wrongdoing, you may end up in a federal courthouse and in a federal correctional institution. But we don't talk enough about what your actions might mean to others, not just victims of violent crime, but your own, your mother, your grandmother, your sister, someone in your household, someone you love and care about. We don't talk about that enough, and the impact, the ripple effect that has through our communities.
You know, that's the U.S. Attorney for the state of Maryland, Erek Barron. Dominick, speak to what he just talked about.
I don't know how to say this without being too blasé about the whole thing. I've heard it for years. There's no accountability with any kids, parents. The families are destroyed from what we saw. Coming from a law enforcement point of view, we were a Band-Aid. We had the pressure from the city that told the command staff to tell us to go out there to wind up, being more community police officers, which was a redundant term in itself. And then when we did our job, we're vilified by the state who won't back us up, our state's attorney or district attorney, depending upon where you're at. You never saw anybody prosecuted, and then you were out to be the bad guy, which then creates animosity between the police and the public. I don't care how well you try to keep it separated. I've heard the political rhetoric over and over and over again. So to be honest, when they say their talking points, I tune out because I've yet to see anybody in a position that's there for the state to actually care and help the families that are out there. So to be honest, it's, to me, what they're saying, it's all talk.
Yeah, but under his watch, he's reduced crime by 20% in the state of Maryland. You can't argue with the facts. He is.
There's ways. There's 100% ways, politically wise, to manipulate numbers.
Yeah, these numbers are not manipulated, though. I mean, even the most harshest critics have admitted that crime, particularly in Baltimore, has been dramatically decreased. I don't think you should become cynical to believe that everybody's reading from the same script. There are people out there who really care and has a conscience and want to get this crime under control, and they're willing to take tough measures to do so, Dominick.
There's the Democrat cities, and again, I'm pinning this on Democrats because I'm from the Chicago area. I worked in Lake County, just north of Chicago, but we still had the residual that bled over from them. There's no money in a solution. And it doesn't matter how much of an idealist you are. I ran for sheriff for Cook County. Doesn't matter how great your ideas are, how well you come in for the people. The powers that be will always prevent the righteous from serving the community. So again, I'm very burnt out, very disheartened.
But then again, the governor of Maryland, Westmore, has given his U.S. attorney more resources and money than any other state U.S. attorney in the entire United States. They've put the funds and the money there, and they've given them the backbone to get serious about getting this crime under control.
As long as they're prosecuting, as long as they're upholding, as long as the cops are allowed to do their job, then that's great. That's not common, and I would love to see that spread throughout the country, but you just don't see it.
Hans?
Well, in fact, on that particular issue, look, that may be Maryland, but in the District of Columbia, a report recently came out saying that the U.S. attorney there dismisses 60% of the cases brought to him by police officers. So he's not prosecuting the majority of crimes there. The prosecuting attorney for the district that deals with juvenile crimes has a policy that no matter what you do as a juvenile, you will not be sent to prison. They universally just send kids home again. And you talk to any police officer there, and they'll tell you no matter how many times they arrest a juvenile for a crime, they're out the very next day. There's no punishment.
Let me ask you a controversial question.
Sure.
If these juveniles were white and not black, would the U.S. attorney take a different position? Is it about they believe because these kids are brown and because they run these major cities and they look like them, they don't want to get into this thing called mass incarceration, putting our little brown boys in jail, and yet you look at a place like Maryland where you have 6.1 million residents and only 15,000 people commit the crime, and about 300 of them commit the most crimes repeated and repeated. Do you think race plays a role in this?
Look, I don't know what
yeah. Just tell
No, I don't know what the motivation is. I do know that the rogue prosecutors in these major cities, they're coming out of this school that is teaching them that we have mass incarceration, that our entire system is systematically racist, and that our prisons should be emptied. I mean, that's what's being taught in the law schools, and that's where they come out of. But look, people are getting so tired of this. In San Francisco, which is one of the most liberal cities in the country, folks there are so tired of this that last year they actually recalled the very liberal prosecutor there because he was refusing to actually prosecute crimes. And that's the kind of reaction we need in other places, too.
Leonard?
% increase in violent crime per the United States Department of Justice that just came out last week through the National Crime Victimization Survey. Armstrong and guest, that is the biggest percentage increase in violent crime I've ever heard in my decades of studying crime and justice in the United States, a 44% increase. I could go on about women and their rate of victimization, men in terms of their rate of victimization, record fear of crime in the United States. We have an enormous problem. I mean, the largest increase in violent crime in this country's history, to my knowledge, has just been produced by the National Crime Victimization Survey. Now, there's other data that basically says crime is decreasing, but at the moment, per the U.S. Department of Justice, that is this country's official statistic, that there's been a 44% increase in violent crime and a huge increase in serious violent crime. So we have a problem. We have a problem, and people need to come to grips with it. Now, the thing that amazes me, that considering that we have record fear of crime in the United States, and crime was such a big issue in terms of the midterms, and will be such a big issue in terms of the upcoming presidential election, that the media, the mainstream media, has basically ignored this report from the U.S. Department of Justice through the National Crime Victimization Survey, 44%, a record increase in violent crime. What more do we need to wake people up to the fact that we have a very serious problem?
What demographic is committing this crime, Leonard?
As I've said before, the great majority of the people who are arrested in this country are not African American. The great majority of the people who are in jail are not African American. The great majority of people who are in prison are not African American. This goes across the board. I mean, this is a big country, and African Americans make up 12, 13% of the population. So it's impossible for the African American population to be driving this, getting back to your question to your other guest. So it's across the board in terms of a fairly equal splits between white, Hispanic, and African American. And the point in all of this is that it's not an African American issue, and I'm not trying to be politically correct. The point is that this issue that we're dealing with, that we're struggling with, you could go to cities where the African American population is minimal, and they're still struggling with this issue. We're talking about a national, huge increase in violence, whether it be Baltimore, whether it be Sacramento. We're talking about big increases for men, huge increases for women. Across the board, this is getting out of hand, not just in cities, but also now in suburban areas. Before, it was the increases in victimization, violent victimization, were sort of limited to cities. And now it's now going into the suburbs. And some of the stats, I mean, so ordinarily, people of higher incomes have less victimization. People of higher incomes now have higher rates of victimizations. So, this is getting out of hand. This is now moving out into the suburbs. It's now moving out into the rural areas. It's now affecting people who have not been affected that much before. And, talk about a progressive agenda. If we're going to be pro-women, and if we're going to be protecting women in the United States from all the ills that happen in terms of sexism, well, let's start bringing down their rates of violent crime.
Marcia, what is fascinating about this is that the drugs, the fentanyl, is playing a role here.
Yeah, it definitely is. And this is something that I brought attention to some of our congressional members. When you're up late at night and you're watching all the commercials from the pharmaceutical companies, we are a land of drugs, we're a land of opiates, and we're a land of unhappiness. We're number one on drugs, number one on happiness throughout the whole world. But if you notice some of the side effects of some of the legal drugs that we are allowed to take, it says it may cure your kidney ailment, but you might have suicidal and homicidal tendencies. That cannot be overlooked. And then when you look in the public school systems, because of a lot of the budgets did not cover some of the necessary tools or the salaries of teachers, whatever, they were augmented by pharmaceutical companies. So back in the day, you may have had 1 or 2 children in the classroom that had attention deficit disorder. Now almost every child has it because they can come in and give the drugs. And those drugs, too, for anti-depression, make the children lethargic, hopeless. But again, that side effect, homicidal and suicidal tendencies. So we're living a wild, wild west. I know the gentleman talked about Chicago. I'm from Chicago. I went home and I told Mayor Lori Lightfoot that dodging bullets should not be a running sport. So when I talk about what some of the things that we need to do, we have to look at it overall. Yes, for me, race does play a large part of it. I'm part of the United Justice Coalition, and we'll be addressing some of this in New York City at the Javits Center on December the 1st. But when you look at how our children, they said now they want to raise the age to 25 because the brain doesn't really function fully to adulthood to the age of 25. Well, imagine how you're training those individuals to the age of 25. We used to think that it was the age of 12 when you learn everything, or at the age of 3 when your habits kicked in. So if you raise it to 25, if we're constantly teaching them that criminal activity is okay, then that's what they're going to be. There has to be a disruption, even in that, whether they legislate it or not. This is when I call them the churches, because we are facing a moral and spiritual crisis in America. So those who say they're righteous, remember that song, I Believe the Children Are Our Future? Teach them well. Not bad behavior, teach them well and let them lead the way. So not only are we darkening their present, we're darkening all of our future because they're not being taught well on so many levels.
And some of them need to be put away.
Well, we're not saying, absolutely, because some are criminals, like the brothers who killed their parents. We're not saying the criminality, which also is a mental health issue, right? And a lot of it's not mental health. Our children are growing up to be apathetic. I'm watching 18-year-old girls celebrating a birthday with balloons and laughter. By the time they get across the street, they're in a brawl that is so violent that the sisters and I, that we were having dinner, we had to call the police, and that really made me sad because my whole thing on the United Justice Coalition is trying to get law enforcement not engaged in the community.
Wait a minute. You should have called the police.
Well, we did call the police. We did.
We're going to take a break. You got to call the police.
I did, but it was not an either or. I mean,
imagine the lives you saved.
Yeah, it was bittersweet. I said it was bittersweet.
Yeah. I don't agonize over that.
Yeah, okay. I'm more empathetic. I know.
We'll be back. Call them. You know, it's as if all our foreign enemies are using our open borders to infiltrate the worst kind of drugs and criminal behavior in the society to continue to weaken the fabric of our institutions, knowing exactly what the outcome would be, and they just sit back laughing. It's like I don't have to use a single bullet or a gun. All I need to do is unleash this culture warfare, corrupt them with drugs, give them drugs and arm them with firearms, and they'll go and do exactly what has happened in the past. This is nothing new in the sun, Hans.
No, and this is where all these other issues, we were talking about, are exacerbated by the open border policy this current administration has. Look, fentanyl has become one of the biggest killers of young adults. It drives crime. And where is it coming from? Almost all of it is coming across the southern border. And where is that coming from? The largest manufacturers of this in the world are Chinese pharmaceutical companies. They are deliberately and intentionally shipping this to Mexico, where it gets into the hands of these criminal drug cartels, and then they're shipping it in the United States. And when you have an open border, it is very easy for them to not only get these drugs across, but to engage in human trafficking and all the other crimes that we are seeing increases in.
Dominick, what does it take to slow it down, make progress that we're not doing? And are there places in this country that's not having this crime spree because they are a law and order jurisdiction?
I don't have that answer because you know what? It seems like the United States loves this war on drugs because it's a moneymaker for them. I mean, your border is going to stay open. We know that drugs and human trafficking, that's the reason why that border is staying open. And we know that we have a bunch of kids who, again, your guest who talked about the last several years of COVID, all these poor kids who have no social skills anymore, who are forced to stay at home, forced to wear masks, can't connect through empathy. If you want to feel something, what's the answer? Drugs. Doesn't matter if it's an opiate you're going to steal from your parents when they're not around or something you're going to take on the street. We talk about all these awesome talking points while whatever powers that be are still laughing at us because this is the way the world is now. Corrupt your youth, just incite crime, vilify it, but also at the same time celebrate it by saying you're the victim, even though you're a criminal. Have more drugs. Let's increase your behavior. And then have all of us who are trying to fix the problem chasing our tails. To be honest, I don't have an answer for you outside of, again, this will be my personal view on this. Faith and family. That's it. We've removed God from the home. We've removed God from the schools, and you've removed the family's capability from being able to raise their kids the right way. So to me, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you at all on how this problem is going to be solved outside of those two attributes.
But intentional to what end, Dominick?
Who I couldn't tell you. For all we know, whatever the powers that be are playing a giant Andy Kaufman, loving the fact that we're all sitting back fighting amongst each other, watching our kids destroy themselves, grow up into oblivion, and watching us as adults feel helpless in the process. It's a sick joke, but it's perpetuated because we can all say, all right, well, we get white kids are being prosecuted the same way as black kids, but then is it the black behavior? Is it the white behavior? We can just start picking this apart, call it culture, call it race, call it whatever, but they don't want a solution. There's no solution that wants to be brought forward because when you have a society that's chaotic amongst each other, politicians, that's where they thrive. They always get appointed, elected, put in office based off of the promise of fulfilling solutions that never come in.
Leonard, what are we not talking about tonight that is equally important?
To make it clear that all throughout the United States, it's not just the same kind of problem. I'm talking to you right now from 3,000 feet in a mountain in the Appalachians. The Appalachians has a huge drug problem. They have a huge problem in terms of jobs and the economy. But there's very little stranger-to-stranger violent crime within the Appalachians. Now, if you have the drugs there, and if you have the low income there, and the idea of, opportunities for prosperity, it's very challenging within the Appalachians. Yet the amount of stranger-to-stranger violent crime is, 1,000 times less than Baltimore, Chicago, New York, and any other large city. So what I'm talking about is that we have to look at this from a accountability point of view. There's a certain point where we have to hold people who do harm to other human beings accountable. As long as we don't hold other people who do harm, as long as we don't hold them accountable, we give them a green light. So there's a certain point where we've got to deal with child abuse in this country. If we don't deal with child abuse, we'll never solve the problem. If we don't hold offenders accountable. And I'm not necessarily saying prison in every case. I'm not necessarily even suggesting probation in every case. But there's got to be a strong degree of accountability. People need to understand that there are consequences for harming other human beings. So child abuse, the lack of consequences, and the lack of standards throughout this country. We have to hold ourselves to standards. Look, Criminology 101. Society controls crime. It's not the police. It's not the criminal justice system. It's not the court. Society controls crime. And anybody who studies criminology, that from the very beginning, that is a fundamental premise in terms of understanding crime within any country. Society controls crime. As long as we're willing to look the other way when people do bad acts, as long as we're willing to ignore the child abuse problem that we have in the United States, as long as we we buy stolen goods, as long as we don't condemn people who violently treat other human beings, violently treat women, as long as we don't do that, we're going to have a crime problem. This country needs to stand up for itself. This country needs to say no more. I'm tired of this. Record fear of crime, huge increase in violent crime per the National Crime Victimization Survey from the U.S. Department of Justice. And until we come to grips with a countrywide declaration that we will no longer tolerate this crap and hold people accountable, it's going to continue.
And then we see these stories, Marcia, where Senator Bob Menendez has gold bars in his home, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, Mercedes-Benz, and they call for him to resign. I mean, they make their criminality legal and hide behind being elected to office. And then we talk about lowering the standards and what do we have to look to? Our institution are losing their honor. You have Senator John Fetterman looking like a drug lord, dressing like a drug lord, sitting like a drug lord. I mean, what does it tell our kids when we see this? He looks like a drug lord.
Well, he looked like a bad athlete in a hoodie to me, but, you know, without using any ad hominems.
Oh, he looks like a drug lord. I don't apologize for it. That's what he looks like, a drug lord.
You're so unapologetic.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, but back to the brother from Chicago, my hometown boy. You know, you talk about chaos. There can never be order in chaos. And when I talked about earlier would take a community, we have to look at, again, the society. We have women under the age of 30 who don't know how to relate to one another, like the story I told you about the 18-year-old girls and the birthday party. They're looking at reality housewives, women who are fighting one another, throwing bricks and champagne bottles at one another. They're looking at the Jerry Springer type shows where it's all about conflict or chaos. And then we have to look at the division of our, basically, our humanity through the social constructs that are fractured now, all the way down to the DNA almost, right? That we don't know if we're man or woman. I don't care about your sexual orientation. It's your race. It's your faith. It's your ethnicity. It's your geographical location. There's about 100 social constructs that we use to divide one another and then counsel one another so easily. And this has to be addressed too. And that's societal. And it's also, to me, I think it's very intentional, because the more you fracture a society based upon their social constructs and what they gravitate to, then you can really take charge over them. And I'm really against that. And that's a conversation that we need to have too. We are all human, right? And if nobody is above the law, and that's from the White House to the outhouse, nobody should be above the law. Every country has borders. I mean, if there were no borders, you've been there, I would go over to the country of Qatar and I would take my allowance monthly, but I know that I can't do that. Every country has borders, but that becomes for our legislators to give us great immigration laws and border laws so we won't seem like we're selfish. We're a country that fell, and we're talking about stopping the government every year, but we're giving money to even sometimes people who might be our enemies. You talk about Chinese coming across the border. What are you running from when we know that if China is our enemy, how come we're not checking them? So I'm for being law. The legislators, the whole Congress is about legislation. Let's legislate some laws, make it bipartisan, and make this country as good as it can be without all the deterioration that social constructs make, because that's where the division comes in on every level of our lives, and we see that daily.
And we will be back. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back, and thank you for joining us. Hans?
Well, look, we do have cultural issues and cultural problems that we need to fix, but there are also practical steps that we can and should be taking. Remember, the 1960s, we had very high crime rates. And what happened and what started bringing those rates down was we started doing things like passing, three felonies and you're out, to get rid of the kind of criminals who were constantly committing crimes. So if you committed 3 felonies, you then went to prison and you stayed there. We passed truth in sentencing laws. You know, before then, we had a problem of judges putting in sentences, 10, 20 years, and you'd get out in 2 years on probation and be committing crimes again. don't forget, New York had become practically unlivable in the 1970s because of high crime rates. And what happened? You had a U.S. attorney come in, Rudy Giuliani, who said, you know what, we're actually going to start enforcing the law. And they put in a policy that today people say, oh, it's terrible, the broken windows policy. But it worked. What they discovered was if you allow misdemeanors to go without punishment, criminals see that and say, oh, well, we can do more serious crimes because we're going to get away with it. And by going after not only misdemeanors, but other crimes like that, they were able to lower crime rates across the board, including more serious crimes.
Even search and frisk work.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yes, it
that's
worked.
right. And look, the defund the police movement was one of the worst things to happen to cities. I mean, the highest crime rates in the big cities is in urban areas, often the poor areas. That's where the highest crimes are. And by reducing the number of policemen there, people on patrol, policemen working with the local communities, you're encouraging criminals to be able to commit crimes. You take those kind of steps, and we might be able to get this crime problem under control.
You know, one of the concerns, Dominique, is that law enforcement across the country doesn't seem to have the stomach to pursue a lot of this petty crime, which leads to greater crime, because, you know, they don't want to get sued, they don't want to get shot, they want to go home to their families, and nor do they believe that the departments or the mayors of those cities are going to back them up. So they just do enough to make sure they get their paycheck and not place themselves in harm's way. Your thoughts?
Have you seen some of the candidates that are out there? You got record numbers of men and women who are leaving, and they're replacing them with children 21 years old to become a police officer who don't even know what the Constitution is. I can't believe it's 2023. We're entering 2024, and you still have police using force, and they're being caught on camera. Everybody's got a camera, and these cops don't know how to act. Everything it's designed to perpetuate, in my view, cultural divide, 100%. In my opinion, I do believe, especially out here in Chicago, that the black community is being leveraged for every crime possible in order to wind up keeping certain people in jobs. And I talked about, you and I had a discussion about that a while ago, that there is 100% systemic racism in Chicago when it comes down to the black community. You're going to take a judicial system that is now prosecuting, and you're going to get all the north and west suburban whites out there who are watching what they would do. I would never steal. I would never do any of this. You're getting condonable behavior towards a very influential group, young men and women who are not educated, their families destroyed, and you're creating this animosity by having whites sit back in their suburban homes where this kind of crime doesn't happen, and they're bringing up the racism that everybody's saying we don't have. You're going to see more racism come by in the next several years because of what they're purposely creating. I'm not talking the normal racist where everything's racist, but that entitlement or that ideology of one race is inferior to others. You're going to get whites in suburban areas who are watching the black communities loot stores, rob stores. Nobody's being held accountable. If you don't think that there's a social issue that's on the outskirts of that's being designed where people are why should I do anything? Why if this culture is going to get away with anything, why shouldn't I be doing this? It 100% is being done by design, in my opinion. The black community is purposely set up for failure in these urban cities. They're being purposely leveraged to go right into jail for profit. And they're being this perfect pawn for, again, cops who don't know what their job is, don't know how to react. They have no social skills because we're hiring children on the street. And then you got the whites on the side who are fueling into racism. All three sides, two cultures and one law enforcement. You're going to see an explosion of hate in the next several years.
Marcia, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I agree with you because as a black community, especially in Chicago, as an example, we're finding ourselves between a rock and a hard place. And I have to disagree. 3 strikes, you're out was detrimental to the black community because most of the incarcerated during that time period were African American for misdemeanor crimes. And we have to realize, too, that a lot of people are still sitting in prison who have never had a day in court. So it was a deterioration, again, of the family. When you look at what's happening with white-collar crime or how people in Fortune 500, or, you know, if you're an influencer and you can do a crime and somebody's still sitting in prison for something less than what you did, that's unjust. So the legal system, we're talking about the people in the street. We need to go to the legislators and the judiciary committees to say, let's get this thing right. No one, like I said, and what they like to say is above the law, but we see that contradictory every day. And another issue, too, when you talk about community engagement, is that if our children are taught, like I said earlier, that criminality is a great way to go, well, there's going to be an equalizer that's very near in the future that Mayor Adams launched a couple of months ago, and that's robo-dogs. Now, he can call it robo-dogs, but I'm going to make it entertainment. It looks like robo-cops to me. And when you throw in artificial intelligence and technology, how can the Black community say it's racism if we don't understand the algorithms around that when they're going to be utilizing them more instead of the law enforcement human beings? So you can't say that. And also, if you don't think it's real, look at what China's doing with their smart city. The United Nations almost over 10 years ago have what they call cutely smart city. We think it's like our smartphones. But let me tell you, for the young people out there who are listening, the Minority Report exists. Every time you take a screenshot, every time you swipe your card, a profile is technologically being built on you. So we don't have to wait for the police to come, because if they ever brought that program out onto the streets of the United States, then you're already in the system. And this is an equalizer, but it may not be. So we need more African Americans on that tip, on artificial intelligence, to see how that law enforcement for the future will be beneficial to all Americans or detrimental to specific communities as well.
You know, Leonard, Hans took us back to when crime was at worse levels than what we're seeing today. And yet we were able to put in policies that change that trajectory. So obviously we have a blueprint that can work.
We have a blueprint that can work, and we know what to do within the criminal justice system. It's just, as one of your guests said, it's the problem is that the criminal justice system, I mean, look, arrests are down by huge amounts. The rate of incarceration has dropped tremendously. We're not holding people accountable. So yes, we have a blueprint. We know what to do, but I'm afraid at this stage of the game, it's too politically incorrect to move in that direction. And that's just the God's honest truth. The second thing is that, look, if I said something disparaging about African Americans or women, my career would be over within 5 minutes. People would stand up and yell and scream and do it justifiably. Why in the name of heavens can't we do the same thing about criminals? Why can't we get up and simply start condemning people who do harm to other human beings? I don't care whether it's a United States senator. I don't care if it's a presidential candidate. I don't care if it's a street criminal. We have to stand up for what's right in the United States. And I'm not talking about lower level crimes. I'm not talking about smoking marijuana. I'm not talking about petty theft. I'm talking about rape, robbery, doing terrible things to other human beings. We have to stand up and start as a society saying this is ridiculously getting out of hand. And we have to stand up as a society and say this is wrong. Why can't we do that? Why can't we say that this is wrong? Why can't we say that this is detrimental to every human being, not only in their communities, but throughout the entire country? Why can't we do that? So the criminal justice system knows what to do. If anybody out there wants to give us a green light instead of moving in the opposite direction. But the key is making sure that we come together as one society, all African Americans, all whites, all Hispanics, it doesn't matter. We all collectively agree that these are the things you should raise your kids right. We're going to stand up for what is right. We're going to say what is right, and we're going to hold criminals accountable. That's your game plan right there. If we do that, we'll cut violent crime in half.
Dominick, from your years of experience, what gives you a glimmer of hope that this can change?
Returning to ground zero and letting every man for himself. No, in all seriousness, your guest, Leonard, I believe, talked about society, right? Society being able to wind up leveraging us. How? And he's right, but how? How is it that you have laws on the books, they're not being enforced? You have a nation that, 15, 20 years ago, we never got news as fast as we have now, right? But every single day, every 10, 15 minutes, you're getting a new news story of this crime, that crime. And it does affect us to where we're all on edge. Our cortisol level, our stress level is up. And we're seeing The example I use when on my show is that, you know, I could be on my phone and I could see, oh my gosh, Hunter Biden, X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. But I go out in my cul-de-sac to have a cigar in my house, and I got liberals on my street, and we all love each other. There's no problems in my neighborhood. But man, the social media that's pumping everything to the perception of what's going on with me, I'm at a level 10. So if we have the perception, and then the solution is, all right, society's got to take over. Society, how can we come together when black community is being told that the whites are their problem? The whites are looking at the black community and saying they're not being held accountable. And then you got the Hispanics who are coming in saying, well, we're not treated fairly. It's a constant hot potato.
And you know what, Dominique, we have to continue this conversation. I cannot thank you, Leonard, Hans, and Marcia for just a breathtaking, overdue conversation. I'm Armstrong Williams.